Hi and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to compare the 24mm G Master, which is a lens I owned for almost a year, and 20mm 1.8G, and this is a lens that I've recently added to my kit. And while I'm doing this comparison, I'm also going to be telling you why I've added this to my kit. So without further ado, let's go straight into the video. Okay, so these two lenses have a very similar design. As you can see, they look very similar. They have the same focus ring and aperture ring. They both have the G logo. The only difference is the G Master has a red one. Both have a function button. They both have the autofocus manual switch, and they both have a clickable, declickable aperture switch, as you can see. So everything about these two lenses is almost the same. They both look very premium, very well built. They're both made in Thailand. If we take the caps off, by the way, the caps are the same size, so they can be swapped around. The only thing that cannot be swapped around is the hoods. If we put them like head to head, they're exactly the same size. The only reason this one's a little bit thinner is because when it moves farther down from the ring, it's a little bit recessed compared to the G Master, and it's also a little bit shorter. So in terms of the aperture, the G Master has a maximum aperture of f1.4 and it has a minimum aperture of f16, whereas the G has a maximum aperture of 1.8 and a minimum aperture of f22. Speaking of the aperture, the 20mm has 9 aperture blades, whereas the G Master has 11 aperture blades. The G Master has an angular view of 84 degrees, whereas the G has an angular view of 94 degrees. So that's 11.9% more wide than the 24mm G Master. So in terms of the elements inside, they're different designs. The G Master has 13 elements in 10 groups, whereas the G has 14 elements in 12 groups. So this is a different design in terms of the elements inside. And also regarding the size, the G Master weighs 15.7 ounces or 445 grams without the caps and the hood, and the G weighs 13.16 ounces or 373 grams, again without the caps and the hood. Both of them have a 67mm filter thread, as you can see it says on both of them, and the G Master has a minimum focus distance of 0.24 meters or 0.79 feet. And the G has a minimum focus distance of 19 centimeters or 0.63 feet. And now let's go ahead and run some tests and see if there's more to the G Master other than the fact that it costs more and it's bigger than the G. Okay, so honestly, these two lenses are very close when it comes to sharpness. They're very similar. I felt that sometimes the G Master was a little bit sharper than the G, and sometimes I felt that the G was a little bit sharper than the G Master. But if I were to choose one, I'll probably choose the G, as the images coming from the G felt a tiny little bit sharper a lot more often than the ones coming from the G Master. But that's probably because, you know, these two lenses are different focal lengths and you need to match the frames exactly so the comparison will be accurate. But based on the tests that I did, like I said, they're very close, very similar. But if I were to choose one, I'd probably choose the G as being a tiny little bit sharper than the G Master. And that could be due to the fact that the G is a little bit cleaner when it comes to chromatic aberration. Picking up chromatic aberration, here's an example where we have these two lampposts and you can see there's a lot more purple fringing and more green on the image taken with the G Master, whereas the G is a lot more controlled than the G Master. And that could probably be because the G is a newer lens, it has a more complex design, I don't know. But yeah, I was actually surprised that the G Master has more chromatic aberration than the G. Okay, so in the previous example I didn't have the lens compensation turned off, so I turned it off just to make sure the chromatic aberration test will be accurate. So I shot another example. By the way, if you don't know how to turn it on or off in your Sony camera, you go into the menu and the menu option 1 where it shows a camera, and sub menu 2, and over here you can have vignetting compensation, chromatic aberration compensation, and distortion compensation. So I turned the chromatic aberration off while I took this test to be sure both lenses perform accurately and none of the images will have the chromatic aberration compensation applied. So again, the image on the left was taken with a G Master and the image on the right was taken with the G. So if we zoom in on the image taken with the G Master, as you can see, there is some chromatic aberration over there. And now we're gonna click on this one and we're gonna try and match them. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, the image taken with the G Master has a lot more purple fringing, so this confirms it. The G Master does have more chromatic aberration than the G. As you can see, the G is a lot cleaner. It does have a little bit of green and a little bit of purple here and there, but it's a lot more controlled than the G Master. Now the other reason I was surprised there's more chromatic aberration on the G Master than there is on the G is because if we look at the lens design of both of these two lenses, both of them have 3 extra low dispersion elements which are known to reduce chromatic aberration. So I was hoping that since both of them have 3 extra low dispersion elements, they will be comparable when it comes to chromatic aberration, but unfortunately the G does control the chromatic aberration a little bit better. And so it's probably because Sony has improved their technology or the way they make the elements, I don't know, but definitely the G controls the chromatic aberration better than the G Master. Okay, so now moving on to distortion. Okay, so as expected, when it comes to distortion, there will be a little bit more distortion on the G because it's wider than the G Master, and also when you're talking about the G, we're entering ultra wide territory, whereas the G Master is on the edge of ultra wide but it's still wide, whereas the G is ultra wide. By the way, I turned the lens compensation off for both of these pictures to make sure the results will be accurate, to make sure the camera won't try to compensate for the distortion based on the profile of the lens. So as you can see, again, the picture on the left is taken with the G Master and the one on the right is taken with the G, and obviously the G does have a little bit more distortion as expected, but it's well controlled even with the lens compensation turned off. It's not very bad given the fact that it's a 20mm lens, and like I said, it's ultra wide already. Because I don't know whether I mentioned this in the beginning, but 20mm, even though it's only 4mm more width, it does make a big difference, especially if you're far away from your subject. The other thing I noticed with these two images over here, because I turned the lens compensation off, the camera will not compensate for vignetting either. So as you can see, there's a good amount of vignetting in both examples. So both the G Master and the G has a good amount of vignetting, but I would say the G Master, I don't know, but to my eye, the G Master looks like the vignetting spreads a little bit more across the frame, whereas the G, it's only noticeable more towards the corners. So as you can see, the center is bright, and as you move away from the center, it starts to gradually go darker, whereas the G, it only goes darker starting for like around here and here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to have a look at is the lens flaring and ghosting. So I shot 2 sample videos. One was shot on the G and one on the G Master. This was shot on the G, and as you can see, there is some flaring going on. I was pointing the camera straight at the sun, and as expected, you know, there will be a little bit of flaring, at least a tiny little bit. And in the case of the G, there is quite a bit, but it's not really bad. It does spread across the frame, but it's not really bad. I've seen worse than this, and this was shot on the G Master, and as you can see, the G Master does perform better than the G, and honestly I didn't expect that. I'm actually surprised by this result, because if you search the specs of these two lenses, you can see that both of them have nano AR coating on them, so I was expecting both of them will perform similar when it comes to lens flare and ghosting. I know there are some photographers out there who claim the G Master has extra coatings, but that's not actually accurate. On Sony's website you can check the specs of these two lenses, and both of them have the nano AR coating on them, so both of them should perform similarly when it comes to lens flare. Okay, so maybe this difference can be attributed to the fact that one lens has 2 advanced spherical elements and the other one has 2 extreme spherical elements. By the way, I would give the win to the G Master because it has less lens flare, even though it looks to my eye that it has a tiny little bit more ghosting than the G. Okay, so when it comes to the autofocus of these two lenses, there's not much to say about them other than the fact that they behave similarly. Both of them focus accurately, they're both reliable, they both keep me in focus regardless whether I walk away from the camera or towards the camera, and I would say both of them are consistent, both of them are fast, and both of them are quiet. One notable difference between the two in photography mode is that the G is slightly faster, which is due to its extreme dynamic linear motor over the G Master's direct drive supersonic wave motor, which is an older focusing technology. By the way, I do want to mention that all the recently released Sony lenses that benefit from this new focusing system will have this free moving focusing element inside the lens. While the lens is detached from the camera body, the camera is off or in idle mode, so don't panic if you experience this. There is nothing wrong with your lens. So I'm mentioning this because I've seen a lot of people asking questions about this on a Sony Facebook group that I'm part of. Right, so far the G has been holding up very well against the G Master, but if there's one test where neither the G Master nor the G are doing very well, is focus breathing. I would say the focus breathing on these two lenses is more or less the same, and it's quite severe, I would say. So if you intend to use this lens for video work and you're gonna be focus pulling from minimum focus distance to infinity a lot, that's something to consider. So when it comes to the bokeh, both of these lenses produce a pleasing bokeh, so none of them have any busy or strange looking bokeh. Obviously the G Master will have more bokeh because it's a narrow focal length and it has a faster aperture. Speaking of the aperture, one thing I've noticed about these two lenses when shot at the same aperture, the images coming from the G are a tiny little bit darker, so I think the G has a poorer transmission than the G Master. Anyway, when it comes to the bokeh balls, surprisingly the G wins again because the G Master has the cat eye or football shaped kind of bokeh balls in the corners, whereas the G has bokeh balls round all the way across the frame, even in the corners. The other thing I want to mention about the bokeh, both of them have clean bokeh balls, so none of them have any onion rings showing in the bokeh balls. So overall, both of them have a beautiful, pleasing bokeh, but on one side the G Master wins because it has a more pronounced bokeh due to its fast aperture and the fact that it's a narrower focal length. But on the other side, the G wins because it has round bokeh balls all the way across the frame, unlike the G Master. On the manual focus side, both of these two lenses are focused by wire, which is standard for mirrorless camera lenses nowadays. The good thing is that both of these lenses have a linear response to manual focusing. The ring is smooth and has a good amount of dampening. The G Master has around 153 degrees focus throw and the G has around 149. This is a calculation done by myself, which I'm pretty sure it's close to accurate. I've done it by measuring the distance the ring moves to finish one cycle in relation to the size of the barrel. So they're both around 150 degrees. Which is a decent amount given that they are wide-angle lenses. When it comes to the price of these two lenses, at the moment the G Master is $11.99 thanks to £100 cash back from Sony, and the G will set you back $849 again with £100 cash back promotion from Sony.
Okay, so the main reason I got the 20mm even though I had the 24mm G Master is because I shoot events and I needed something a little bit more wide. I mainly shoot primes, and so far the 20mm has proven to be an amazing lens for the work that I do.
And the second reason is because last year my wife had an attempt at doing a vlog, so I gave her my A6400 with a Sigma 16mm lens, and she found herself in a situation like I am now. She was holding the camera and she was kind of frustrated because the lens wasn't wide enough and she wasn't getting enough of the background in the frame, and she came to me like, my love, listen, this is not wide enough. Why is this not catching everything in the frame, you know? And that's when I learned my lesson, and that the 24mm is not quite wide enough for vlogging, whereas 20mm lens I think is the sweet spot. It's not too wide, it's not too narrow. I mean, it's not as narrow as 24mm, so I think the 20mm is perfect for vlogging. So the previous video was shot on the 24mm, so I switched to the 20mm so you guys can see the difference. I'm holding the camera at arm's length, but sometimes you have to hold your camera like this so you can rest your elbow against your body, because after all you're using a full frame with this lens, and sometimes you may be even using a gimbal as well, and that's not very easy to carry, you know. It puts a lot of strain on your arm, and sometimes you do have to rest your arm against your body. And with the 20mm lens, it doesn't look like too much in your face like the 24 is, and like I said, it captures more of the frame behind you. So I think this is the better lens for vlogging, and also because this lens doesn't have a lot of distortion, I think it's the perfect lens for vlogging. So that's my second reason why I bought this lens. So yeah.
So which one of them wins and which one is the better value? It goes without saying that the G is better value between the two. The G is more wide, smaller and lighter, has a closer minimum focus distance. The sharpness is very comparable to that of the G Master, but with less chromatic aberration. The distortion is very well controlled. If someone showed me a picture from that lens and told me it was a 20mm lens, I wouldn't believe it. It's very well controlled, even with the lens compensation turned off. The autofocus system is slightly faster in photography mode. The bokeh balls are nice and around, even in the corners, and it's better priced than the G Master. That isn't to say that the G Master is a bad lens. Both of them are amazing lenses, and honestly you cannot go wrong with any of them. I still think the G Master is an extraordinary lens, just like I did when I first bought it. But since I needed something a bit wider, I discovered how good of a value this lens is. So if I could only buy one today, it would probably be the G. Having said that, it all depends on your needs. If you need a shallower depth of field with more pronounced bokeh, more light and less lens flare, then the G Master is the right one for you. So there you have it. Thanks for watching everyone. I do hope you guys learned something new from this video. Don't forget to like and share because it helps the channel. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments down below. And also, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing because I'm making this sort of videos all the time, and this way you won't be missing any of them. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care now.